It seems like Auburn's closer to adding another offensive tackle.
Freezing temperatures are likely for several hours inland and a few hours closer to the coast.
Yes.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Happy Cruton Thursday to all who celebrate, as we have John Garcia, Locked On recruiting expert, here with us. And John, it's always fun when we get a commitment that puts out a new list and Auburn's in it. And sometimes the lists are like top 19. I saw that the other day, which is a little ridiculous. Don't even make a list at that point. But we saw Isaiah Autry, a 2024 three-star offensive tackle, 6'7", 275-pound kid, Mississippi kid, put Auburn in his top 5. It was Auburn, Florida State, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and Bama. I know it's a 3-star, but that's a solid list of schools. Your thoughts on Isaiah Autry and Auburn's footing in this recruitment?
Well, like you said, Zach, that offer list isn't really matching some of the rankings associated with Autry, but he's kind of hitting his stride right now. A lot of schools are getting eyes on him and kind of offering on the spot. He's picked up a ton over the last few months, but it was obviously big for Auburn to get him on campus for A-Day. This was his first trip to the Plains, and obviously his top group came out right after that. So I don't think you land in there if you're Auburn without that first impression. So that was, I think, a really big deal. And look, we know the Auburn element of this is new, just in terms of that program, that campus, and all of that. But the relationship with Jake Thornton is really long-standing, multiple years. One of his early 24 targets at Ole Miss, of course, in-state recruit for him at the time. So that relationship is carried over quite well. And then Autry's this 6'7" kind of developmental guy, a prospect that recognizes already, hey, my best ball is maybe 2-3 years down the line. And I think Thornton's track record, even recently at Ole Miss, and developing some of those maybe less, highly coveted guys, that's something that really stands out to Autry, in addition to just the interpersonal relationship the two have. And I thought it was big for Auburn to get him around everyone else, Hugh Freeze on down, with the coaching staff on a day like A-Day itself. So Auburn's firmly in this thing. And Isaiah told me this week, Zach, he's still kind of taking it slow. I think he wants to commit before his senior season, but he's just not ready to commit to a bunch of visits or anything like that in the summer. So very much taking this thing one step at a time. And that top 5 was kind of a breath of fresh air, sigh of relief for Autry. So if it is going to be a bit of a longer play, I think that only increases Auburn's chances, because obviously Ole Miss is the in-state school, plenty familiar there. And then some of the newer players, Alabama, Auburn, Oklahoma in particular, I think are going to get their due diligence going forward. So I do think the longer it goes, it's probably the best news for all of the non-Ole Miss schools in this race.
Seen a few folks that seemed like their opinion would matter on this situation kind of speculate and say it really kind of feels like it's Auburn and Ole Miss. On3's prediction machine, however that works, they've got Ole Miss up by a good bit, and then Auburn, I think Ole Miss is like 49%, Auburn's like 16%, and everybody else is a lot smaller. Do you get the vibe that all 5 of these schools are in it, John? Or do you think it's probably Ole Miss, then Auburn, then a big drop-off after that?
That's probably the order today, if Autry was to put it out, just in terms of where he is most comfortable. Again, getting that full Auburn experience, I think, was important for him. With Alabama, not sure where he stands on the board. FSU was in it very early for him. Haven't seen a lot of traction lately. And then Oklahoma's kind of piquing his interest, right? He's got to explore that a little bit more, sort of like Auburn in this regard, just one visit to each of those two programs. But the relationships at Auburn are obviously much further along for Autry. So, yeah, I think if it were today, Ole Miss and Auburn would be the front runners, and they're 2 of the 3 closest to home on top of that. So I think that matters here as well with what looks like kind of a regional recruitment.
Yep. No, that Jake Thornton hire continues to look more and more impressive as time goes on. Props to Hugh Freeze for seeing that. And then just the value of getting talent to Auburn from the state of Mississippi. It always seems like there's a few guys in every team. It's like they're key dudes. So that's great. Maybe Isaiah Autry is in the next group. Before we talk about guys, that could potentially flip, and it seems like we talk about this every week, John, but I think it's relevant. Before we get to that, though, there are two guys from Texas that several listeners reached out and wanted to get information on. Let's start with Terry Bussey. I don't think we've talked about him on the show before. He's a Timpson, Texas native. He's 5'10". Someplace have him at 5'11". 5-star kid. Auburn just recently offered him, and so maybe there's some buzz. They offered him on about 2 or 3 weeks ago, on the 22nd of March. What are you hearing about Terry Bussey? His offer list is pretty much every school that has a college football program. But did Auburn get into this too late? What are your thoughts on this?
I don't think it's too late here. Bussey's talking about making his first Auburn visit now that offer is in hand. He's like you said, extremely coveted coast to coast. I mean, this is, like you said, a 5-star, 500-meter guy who's this quarterback wide receiver hybrid on Friday nights. And man, it translates. The production, the touchdowns, they're just gaudy. I mean, 70 plus rushing touchdowns in his prep career from the QB position, just gaudy numbers across the board here. So naturally, a lot of schools want to be in on Bussey. A&M recently hosted him. Texas is in it. Naturally, those schools closer to home are going to be longtime players for him. But he's branching out a little bit more with some of these external visits. And Auburn, like you said, has done as good a job as any program in America with getting elite talent on campus. So you can't flip, or you can't gain traction with a recruit that you might be, quote unquote, out of it for until you get them on campus. And really that box has been checked across the board for Auburn and in the late stages of 23, and certainly now in the full stage of the 2024 cycle. So it's one of those where you get on campus and you see what happens thereafter. Auburn's got a young offensive staff with a dynamic desire to move fast and score a lot of points. So if you are a wide receiver, particularly one that has some versatility where you could just hand the ball to a kid like Bussey, that's going to be something that appeals to you. So I do think the implementation of all of that is going to be important in this pitch in particular. But obviously, human-wise, you got to get on campus. You got to check it out and see what it looks like, how you feel there before you could really move forward with more consideration.
All right, the other Texas guy, we have talked about him before, Casey Poe, 4-star interior offensive lineman, 6'5", 280 pounds. You got to love that, from Lindale, Texas. He was on Auburn's campus about a month ago. John, we talked about, I think we talked about him last when Auburn, I think Auburn offered him. And so I think that's when we started talking about him the first time, but seemed like he'd be a great fit, right? I mean, I think we compared him to Braden Smith, or right. I did. I think you agreed. But what's the latest with Casey Poe? Are you hearing anything?
Yeah, he's starting to set up more visits deeper into the summer. After that first Auburn trip, he was hinting at coming back. He didn't quite know exactly when he would be able to do so. But I do think before his recruitment comes to a close, he'll get to Auburn. And my inclination is that it's more than likely it'll come in the form of an official visit, because he's another one kind of like Bussey, where a lot of the schools closer to home have been on him for quite some time. So he's familiar with Austin. He's familiar with College Station. He's familiar with Norman. So the schools outside of that footprint, in my opinion, are going to have a higher percentage chance to land an official visit from Poe, who's another one kind of like Bussey, where it's like he seems like he's taking his time, even though he's a coveted player who can commit to a bunch of schools at any point. He's another one that appears to be taking his time. But that first Auburn impression back in March, as you said, went really well. And I think since that point, Auburn has become much more of a player for his services. So it's a bit of a wait and see with Poe, and another one where if it does continue to extend, you feel good about Auburn's chances, since they were a little bit later to the game than most, which is, again, natural when you're a brand new coaching staff.
When will a flip come, and how important are flips in regards to Hugh Freeze landing a top 10 recruiting class in 2024? And also, was A-Day a win on the recruiting front? We get John's thoughts on those things in just a moment right here on Locked On Auburn. I tell you what, speaking of flips, I flip in excitement for Built Bar. Whenever you're looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugars and calories, then you need to try the best tasting protein bar ever. That is Built. You've got to try this. They also have Built Puffs, which are also very, very delicious. But what makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're covered 100% in real decadent, delicious hot chocolate. They've got a ton of flavors: churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. Got a lot of coconut flavors that people are into. I'm not nuts for coconuts, but you can head over to built.com to check them out, or you can go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club, and several other grocery stores now carrying Built Bar. And of course, you can head over to built.com. John, we talk about it every week, but like I said, it's important. There are so many guys that are on flip watch, and you can tell both Auburn media and Alabama media are constantly asking them questions, and both of these guys, prop to them, they're pretty consistent with their messaging. They're not really giving anything away, still saying that they are solidly committed to Alabama, but Auburn's making it difficult. I mean, they've been saying that for months now. But let's start with Perry Thompson, the wide receiver, the wide receiver from Foley, the 5-star guy, 6'3", around 200 pounds, would be a dynamic piece to this class. Your thoughts on Perry Thompson? Still on flip watch, I guess. I think you're muted, John. Good old technology.
There we go.
Sweet. Welcome back.
The Bama commits, I think Thompson is still, like we've talked about, the more likely flip candidate for the Auburn Tigers. The visits are consistent, and when he was there for A-Day and even before, he got to link up with Walker White. I think that is where you could start to see a little bit of a difference from Auburn's pitch compared to some of the other schools that are either trying to flip Thompson or just win in recruiting in general. When the QB gets involved that consistently, and Walker said they connected before A-Day as well, I think that starts to ramp up some of that chemistry and natural rapport, just human to human. But obviously when you start to look at it from an X's and O's standpoint, it's like, hey, in theory, this is the guy that's going to be delivering me the football. So he's one that I should, build a relationship with. So either way, it appears as if the Thompson and White connection is going to continue to push and grow going into the true off season, if you will, in the sport. And I think that's why this is going to be a battle until the papers are signed, whether it's digital or real signatures with a real pen. This is going to be a classic Iron Bowl battle. It really just feels like it all the way through. And like I said, I think he's a little bit more likely right now than Sterling Dixon, who's another Mobile area guy. But he's looks like he's a little bit more solid to Bama just based on some of the things he's saying. But like you also said, Zach, nobody's giving away a ton. It's not like, hey, I'm going to stop taking visits, I won't be at Auburn, etc. It's very much a to be continued across the board. So I think both of those Bama commits in particular are certainly worth keeping track of.
Yeah, and Sterling Dixon, I think, is an interesting one. I go on Mobile Radio every week, so obviously they're very interested in what he's going to do, and they continue to ask about that. But just, a position where, like, you're going to, he may not start because of Keldrick, but, if he's an edge, like, you're talking about coming in and being the number 2 guy in pass rushing situations, like, day one. And you're going to play your second best pass rusher 1 million snaps a game. So I'm sure that's got to be part of the pitch, right, John?
Absolutely. The on-field pitch is pretty clear at Auburn at certain positions, and edge is, like you've talked about plenty of times, it's one of those accelerated ones from the personnel standpoint, regardless of who joins in the portal or via recruiting in 24, a guy like Sterling Dixon is going to have an opportunity. So I think that combined with continued visits and really all the turnover back at Bama, I think that's something to keep an eye on here. Multiple assistant coaches are gone, including the defensive coordinator, Pete Golding, who's now at Ole Miss. So it's not like he took a step back because of that, but naturally, again, you lose a coordinator and 2 assistants beyond that in a short time, and you have to recalibrate a little bit. So he's getting to know some of the newer coaches there at Alabama. He has known Kevin Steele for quite some time, who has a ton of ties to Mobile, of course. So I do think that brought a little bit of familiarity for Dixon, but the other coaches he's still very much trying to build a rapport with. So I do think that's an interesting factor. And Dixon, compared to Thompson, is talking about official visits much more, including one to Auburn. He's basically saying Auburn is a strong number 2 right now. They're going to get an official visit. I'm going to continue to build with the Tigers. So anytime that is out there, I do think it's worth watching, and Bama fans should continue to keep their head on a swivel with these two and maybe more, because this is going to be, if and when it happens, because it will happen at some point,
Right.
This is going to be a primary storyline in the state of Alabama for years to come, it appears.
Sure. So when you look at and project the final makeup of this class, and I know there's a million variables that go into this, John, how do you expect the percentage of flips in Hugh Freeze classes moving forward, and I guess the one that we already saw, versus like what we saw under Malzahn and then the 2 years under Harsin? I don't know if there was a flip under Harsin, but what are you expecting that? Or, okay, now that Hugh Freeze is here, maybe for 25 and beyond, they're actually on top of it. And so it's far enough out where like they don't have to worry about, catching up, I guess. But do you expect this trend to be as solid, like, okay, we're just going to have to flip everybody all the time? Or do you expect that to slowly go away?
It won't go all the way away, because recruiting is so fluid.
Sure.
You're going to have prospects flip away from you, and you probably going to be a player to flip a recruiter to, even if you're not, solely focused on that part of the game. But look, the end of the 23 cycle, it was like every single get was a flip. So you understand
and there were
that
8?
it's certainly right. It's a high probability that you'll see a lot of that in 24. Mm-hmm. I think 40% of the class could have been committed elsewhere at one point by the time this one is all said and done. And that number will slowly go down because, the staff is actually in place and evaluating multiple classes at once and doing all the things that great recruiting programs do. But it doesn't mean it's ever going to go away. The ability to close, the ability to win on the visits are something that translates all the way through. So if we're talking about how great Auburn is doing in March and April, imagine what kind of visits and packages and closing ability they might have if they're doing this in December and January, conversely. So I do think that the flip game is going to be a big part of this class one way or another. And the trend of it overall in college football has not gone away at all. Sure. If anything, it's picked up. More kids flip. Some kids make 2 or 3 commitments before they sign a signature. And sometimes it happens in a couple of days, right? Peyton Bowen last year was committed to Notre Dame on signing day, announces for Oregon, and then the day after that, faxed the papers to Oklahoma. So, I mean, it really gets crazy when you're talking about teenagers that are coveted by programs with a ton of money and resources and prominence towards Sundays, which obviously Auburn overlaps with a lot of those categories.
Do you think that's the personality, like just big picture? Do you think that's the personality of like the way 16 and 17-year-old kids are right now? Or do you think it's NIL?
Look, NIL is a huge factor. There's really no way around that. Even if it's, let's say, a 10% factor in a given recruitment's race, that's a big number. That's something that really can sway you in the end. Because if 2 programs appear dead even and one, has a better NIL package, just, again, going back to the human element of this, would you not go with that program in the end? So that does matter. And all of that has fluctuated, right? How much has Auburn flipped its perception from an NIL standpoint? It's happening at different places. Florida's repairing their NIL image after the Jaden Rashada deal from last year. Yikes. So everybody's at a bit of a different place with NIL, but there's no doubt that it does factor in. And I do think as time goes on, Zach, more of these kids will be more upfront about it. Because right now it's kind of cliche to assume it's a big factor, but kids don't want to talk about it as much. And as these rules sort of evolve and become a little bit more transparent, I do think it's going to be a normal part of the conversation, a couple of years down the road.
Was A-Day a success from a recruiting standpoint? We'll get John's thoughts on that in just a moment, right here on Locked On Auburn. Want to encourage you to join the Locked On Auburn Discord. It is free. All you have to do is click the link in the episode description down below, and also check out all of our written work at auburndaily.com. John, A-Day hosted a lot of kids, a lot of 5 stars, a lot of 4 stars in multiple classes, but it was disgusting. The rain was gross. It was just crummy weather. What are you hearing from these kids that attended? Did they care that it was gross to stand outside? They were just happy to be there. How did Auburn do this weekend, you think?
Well, you would think football players would be okay with standing outside in the rain a little bit, and we did see some reports of some that are trying to get out of Dodge there, which happens. That's normal. Sometimes it's over the kid's head. Hey, mom and dad want to go, you got to go. But with the bulk of recruits that visited, from what I've seen to this point, it was a positive. It was like, hey, this is what football is. This is a part of the game. And I think Walker White joked about like Perry Thompson playing in the rain a little bit, even though he got cold after that. So, this is a normal part of it. Obviously, from a recruiting standpoint, when you think of the kids and their families and just kind of the aesthetics, obviously you would have preferred, 70 and sunny, but that's not what Auburn got for its A-Day. But the roster of names was impressive. And you hit a lot of marks within that, not only with a bunch of commits coming back, including White, who we've mentioned a few times, but you got some big time recruits on campus for the first time or the first time in a while, like your Cam Coleman's of the world, and that's always important. Even if they're close to home, you got to get them on campus consistently, especially at that high school, Central Phoenix City. So I think even just getting Coleman on campus and furthering your status with guys that you've been in the mix for while establishing with the Isaiah Autrys of the world, I do think it was a win, even though I was a little bit surprised to not see a verbal commitment come out of A-Day in particular. I do think we'll see some kids end up as Auburn Tigers that happen to be there that day, though.
Yeah. I was surprised nobody popped this past weekend, and almost felt like a little bit of a bummer. It's like, because there's so many dudes that are so close to committing, and like Joe Phillips kicking it down the road a little bit. I think that's something. And I think it's actually today where he's going to drop a top 5. I think I saw that somewhere.
I think Auburn will make it.
I think so. I feel pretty good about that one. And then like Collins, the former Bama commit that's the tight end / H-back. Like it seems like he's
flip watch before he decommitted, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it seems like there's just several dudes where it's like, all right, we got to be close on some of these guys, and maybe it's calculated behind the scenes. Maybe they all want to do it at the same time or close together to kind of get some momentum going. I don't know, John, but with this staff and the emphasis they're putting on recruiting strategy, like I'm not putting it past them.
Yeah, let's not freak out about that to any degree. I agree with you. A lot of this stuff has to do with optics and perception as much as fans don't want to hear it. Yeah, there are some calculated plays here. So if a recruit or two told Hugh Freeze at A-Day, hey, I'm ready to be a Tiger, there could have been a secondary part of that conversation that says, well, when do you want to announce it? When should we announce it? And then other conversations happen from there. So I don't think we should take too much away from that or really worry at this point. The foundation of the class is strong. You've got your QB1 as all these other dominoes fall, and then you'll go into the offseason with a big slate of official visits to be expected in the month of June.
Sure. John, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who do you think's the next to commit and join this Auburn class?
Well, I still think Phillips. I know I said that last time. I mean, he's close to home. I know he's dropping the top 5 probably as we speak here, but Auburn's going to be there. Whether he's got to do some due diligence with other programs, you understand it. How much is Georgia? How much is Bama pushing here? And then conversely, what about DeMarcus Riddick, the Georgia commitment? I think he's one to continue to track from the Auburn perspective. The in-state schools both appear to be pushing a little bit more for him. I do think something like that will resonate. But, yeah, I mean, I got to go with the low-hanging fruit, the guy closest to campus in Tuskegee there with Mr. Phillips.
Yep, sure. John, how can people check out everything you've got going on, buddy?
Well, your colleagues here at Locked On are keeping me busy, and we're talking ball at every level on Twitter as well. John Garcia _JR is where you can find me.
Once again, you can find all my written work at auburndaily.com, and we will see you tomorrow. This has been Locked On Auburn.